evening, everyone, and welcome to Jackson, Mississippi Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Social Action Forum. We're here to discuss voting rights and voter suppression. We have an amazing panel of panelists here tonight that's going to share with us some great information about what they're doing. These people are actually people that have boots on the ground doing work to increase access for voting. And so I want you all to sit back and relax and learn a lot from the experts that we have tonight. And also throughout this evening, we're going to have, I want to remind those who have been following JMAC on social media that we have been doing an amazing fundraising campaign for HBCUs in the state of Mississippi. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see some ways to donate to your favorite HBCU in Mississippi. And so I'll remind you all again before this forum is over to check out our page when you get ready to text or however you feel comfortable in making your donation to your favorite HBCU in Mississippi. I'll remind you later. So I want to introduce you to our amazing panelists this evening. First of all, we have Hbcus Bennett Scott. She is the executive director of Mississippi Votes, and she's also currently a graduate student at University of Mississippi. Over the last 10 years, Hbcus has been co-creating self-sustaining communities throughout the state of Mississippi through a Black feminist-driven vision that centers human dignity at the core of enhancing the quality of life for all, especially Mississippi's youth. We also have tonight Rhonda Briggins, and she serves as the Secretary and Treasurer of D4 Women in Action. D4 Women in Action is an independent 501c4 social welfare and advocacy organization established by Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. D4 Women in Action seeks to enhance the political presence of Black women and women of color in public policy, legislative, and political arenas, and to build a pipeline of Black women and women of color engaged in enhanced concerted and sustained social action, civic engagement, and involvement in public affairs and the political process. We also have LaTosha Brown. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund and Black Voters Matter Capacity Building Institute. These initiatives are designed to boost Black voter registration and turnout, as well as increase power in marginalized and predominantly Black communities. We also have with us this evening Matthew Campbell. He is with the NAACP. He's a community organizer for the Mississippi NAACP. And his work for the NAACP lies at the intersection of policy advocacy and grassroots organizing around as criminal justice reform and housing. And we also have with us this evening the executive director of the ACLU Mississippi, Jarvis Dortch, the American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi. And the mission of the ACLU of Mississippi is dedicated to promoting, defending, and extending civil rights and civil liberties to all Mississippians, with the emphasis on issues related to criminal justice reform, educational opportunities, access, equality for all, voting rights, and governmental transparency and accountability. So welcome, everybody. We have an amazing panelist, like I said. Everyone's bio is extremely long, so I just had to give you just a snippet of what we're working with this evening. And so we're going to start off with Rhonda Briggins. She is our soror, and we are so excited to have her. And so we want to know from you, Rhonda, what is Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated doing to help expand voting access in our communities?
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for this opportunity. Man, I feel so at home. You know, I'm an Alabama girl, so when I get here with my Mississippi folks, I feel like I'm with my kin, right? So I really appreciate this opportunity, and I feel at home with all of the panelists. I come from a community organizing background. LaTosha and I kind of grew up together in this space.
Rhonda,
So
I have to
happy.
interrupt you right
Okay.
quickly. Apparently, there's some technology issues on the Zoom.
Okay.
Let's pause for a second. Let me see what's going on. I apologize for this. Oh, okay. They can't hear us. So, okay. So we're good to go. Okay, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry, Rhonda. Go ahead, go back, start what you were saying again.
I was just saying, I'm just happy to be here, Aaron. Thank you for this opportunity. And so happy to be here with all of these great panelists. I really appreciate everyone and feel very at home. What has Delta been doing? Well, we always want to be proactive and not reactive. So when I was one of the co-chairs for social action 4 years ago, we began to think about our role in Delta. How we were going to engage in the community, what we were going to do long term, and really come up with some strategies to really increase our presence, but more importantly, to increase our impact. So about 4 years ago, as you all know, we started out with the census. We drove census. We wanted to make sure that for the first time, we'd like to connect dots and align everything, and wanted to really show Delta and the community and educate of how the census connected to voting and what that means. Because right out of when you come out of census, you move directly with using that data and information that you gather through the census to move into redistricting. And so we started that second phase of making sure people understand how maps were drawn in these communities. And we really worked to then segue to your representation, right? So we want to bring it all home, your representation and how those maps become districts. And through those districts, candidates run to represent you. And so you have to vote to make sure those candidates are representing you. And so we wanted to bring it full circle and just connect all of those dots. So that's what we've been doing. We've been making sure we stay engaged, we educate our community. We participated, as you know, in the past presidential election cycle in Georgia. I'm from Georgia, so we really got into the runoff between the U.S. Senate districts. And that was a national issue, not just a local issue. And everyone got engaged. Immediately after the presidential election and when we won those U.S. Senate races, all across the country, especially in Georgia and Texas, you had all of these very egregious voter suppression bills that passed. And so Delta stepped up again. We're the only sorority as a result, once those bills were passed, where we actually are suing the state of Texas and the state of Georgia, and we're a plaintiff in those lawsuits. And so we've been on the forefront. As an organization, we started with voting. We have not ended in voting. It's been 109 years. We are still fighting for our right to vote, and we're still participating in that right. And we're going to make sure that we are going to fight, we're going to engage, and now we're going to sue. And so when it comes to Delta, we are taking it up every time a little further because we know how important and how critical our right to vote is in this country.
So thank you for saying that. So because we had technical difficulties at the beginning and everyone could not hear us, I'm just going to say who all our panelists are and which organizations you all are representing again, for those who did not hear us. So first of all, we have Erika Bennett Scott. She is the Executive Director of Mississippi Votes. We have Rhonda Briggins. She serves as the Secretary and Treasurer of D4 Women in Action. We have LaTosha Brown. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund and Black Voters Matter Capacity Building Institute. We have Matthew Campbell. He is a community organizer with the Mississippi NAACP. And we have Jarvis Dortch. He is the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi, also known as the ACLU. So I wanted to ask you one other thing, because I know you have to get out of here. You have other commitments this evening, but I wanted to ask you, what does collaboration among community organizations look like? And how can we be effective in expanding voting access?
Well, let me say this. What you're doing now, this is a pure example of collaboration. All of these organizations have been joined at the hips over the last couple of years, and we've been together like never before. One of the things that we wanted to do as an organization, especially when you talk about highlighting the Divine Nine. for so many years, people felt like we didn't really collaborate. We weren't on the same page. We didn't work together. And I remember sitting at a table and I said to somebody, wouldn't it be great to have all of the Divine Nine come to Selma, Alabama? So Tasha and I kind of cut our teeth in Selma on the ground for years, organizing in the community. And I said, what we need to have the Divine Nine really show their collective power. And so we asked all of the national presidents of all of those organizations to come to Selma for the 55th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. They all showed up. Mm-hmm. And if you really look at that time in history, now let me really set the tone for you. At that particular time, Kamala Harris had just resigned and pulled out the presidential race. And at that particular time, she had never said in any point of her campaign journey that she was an AKA. She talked about going to Howard, but not in the sense of being really a HBCU. Mm-hmm. After that particular time of her seeing those 30,000 D9 members on that bridge, all of a sudden across this country, everything became the Divine Nine and HBCUs. And so we literally, that moment in time for me, you politicized in the first time the Divine Nine in this much different way of collective power, representing 2.4 million votes in this country. And so people began to see and understand our collective power immediately after that, because we're all C7 organizations. And so we can't do direct political work. So we started working on the campaign scene under the auspice of Team Unity. And so the Divine Nine became Team Unity, and we worked with Black Voters Matter. I mean, LaTosha Brown put probably a couple of $1 million on the ground through the Divine Nine, and where we did everything. We knocked on doors. We bought water. We did everything, but it was these collective organizations, NAACP, SCLC, all of the organizations in our community. You had organizations like Lynx, Jack and Jill, the Boulay, Girlfriends, right? These organizations, Masons, Eastern Stars, all of us came together because that is our power, our collective voice. It's always been the church, it's always been the NAACP, but these other organizations that never been engaged in that way, we not only came together during that time, but I'm going to say we've stayed together. Because if you see what's going on right now today, when we're trying to confirm a Black female for the Supreme Court justice, those organizations are sending out messages right now around this country because we understand the power of our collective voice. And so that's what we've been doing. And we're going to continue to do that because we understand what that means in this country. And I think we have really found a sweet spot amongst one another of how we can collaborate. And that is not a competition, but instead is power. So thank you, Aaron, for this opportunity. And I'm going to go in a minute, but I appreciate you all for this opportunity. Thank you.
I'm so glad you were able to join us, and you just drop off whenever you have to. But to Rhonda's point, though, I just want to highlight that all of those organizations and more that she mentioned have been doing the same type of work individually anyway. So it only makes sense that we all pull together because strength in numbers, right? So it only makes sense for all of us to do the same things that we were doing collectively, and we just make a huge, huge impact that way. So I want to move the conversation a little bit, and I want to talk to Jarvis and get some of his feedback, input, and from his expertise with voter suppression in Mississippi. And so first of all, I want to just ask you, what is voter suppression, and how are lawmakers in Mississippi trying to restrict our voting rights?
Sure. And first of all, thank you all for inviting me and reaching out and for putting this forum together and continuing to engage voters on this issue and engage new people that haven't necessarily been involved in politics. Everybody has a busy life and works, and sometimes you just don't even want to deal with this stuff when you get home. So taking the time to get involved is very important, and we really want to thank folks for doing that. So your question about voter suppression in Mississippi looks like maintaining the status quo. Like Mississippi has the Mississippi legislature doesn't have to pass anything for there to be voter suppression. Our laws are so bad here already that the stuff that's happening in Georgia and Texas, we would wish to have early voting for 7 days. We would wish to have some of the things that they're allowing in Georgia. Now, those things are the way those state legislatures are operating is completely illegal when they're doing that because they want to cut back on voting and cut back on voting in the Black community. But in Mississippi, voter suppression looks like having to have 2 items notarized just to vote absentee. Having no law that allows absentee voting for no excuse. So Mississippi makes it so difficult to vote. It's beyond any other state. We were actually the only state during COVID to not pass any laws that allow people to go vote or vote early due to a pandemic. So we had that distinction of being the only state to not take the pandemic so seriously that we wanted folks to be able to vote during a presidential election.
So, and I want to also highlight the fact that you are a former legislator. You were a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. So, can you kind of share from when you were in that role how difficult it was in order to even get some form of legislation that will increase voting access?
So, the thing about Mississippi is that things kind of sway, and we're like on the back end. Actually, when I was in the legislature, in the House, we passed 2 years in a row a package of bills that would allow for early voting, online voter registration. It would have cleaned up some of the voting code and made it easier for students to vote absentee, which is just almost impossible for students to vote if you're on campus and you want to vote back home. A lot of students end up changing the registration to their college campus. Mm-hmm. That passed in the Mississippi House almost unanimously and went to the Senate where Tay Reeves was in charge, and they killed that bill 2 years in a row. The person that was pushing that was the Secretary of State at the time, who was Deborah Hosemann, who is now a lieutenant governor. Mm-hmm. So fast forward through the Trump administration and all the lies that they have pushed, and what you hear from Republicans at the legislature is, we can't take on these issues because we'll get beat in the primary. So for them, it's political, that they don't have the political will to do what they did 3 or 4 years ago. We should be progressing as a state, but unfortunately, due to the last administration, we are seeing ourselves go backwards when it comes to our democracy. And I think it's something that people need to really pay attention to, because there are a lot of things working their way through different states, through the United States Supreme Court, that really will really take away it sounds crazy to say we won't have a democracy, but there are some things that are being proposed that would allow state legislatures to intervene and decide who their state voted for president instead of voters. So these are things that, literally, you don't have a democracy anymore if that's the case.
So share with us what the ACLU of Mississippi is doing to combat a lot of this.
Yeah, so and we do everything from advocacy to litigation. In 2020, we worked with our partners to sue the Secretary of State, arguing that a pre-existing condition was one of the excuses that should allow someone to vote by absentee during COVID. And we were successful in doing that, where people just had to declare that they had a pre-existing condition like diabetes or asthma that would allow them to at least vote early, instead of having to prove all the other things or take the other steps to vote by absentee. We're also, one of the things that we think dilutes Black voting strength in Mississippi is redistricting. So we're working right now on that issue and looking at, we're advocating for fair maps in the legislature, but we're also prepared to bring litigation that would make sure that Black voters in Mississippi are represented. We have a lot of Black people elected to the Mississippi legislature. But the thing is, we're vastly underrepresented, and take the state Senate. Now we have 14 out of the 52 districts are majority Black. We can draw maps that make that 20 or 22 districts majority Black. So that's 8 districts out there that should have that should allow Black voters to choose a person and actually have representation at the Capitol. But right now, if we maintain the status quo on the dot maps that look like they do right now, you're going to have Black voters underrepresented and packed into very few districts across the state.
Wow, wow. So I'm going to jump to Matthew Campbell since you mentioned redistricting, and so I would like Matt to kind of explain to everyone, what is redistricting and how is it affecting voting access in Mississippi.
Yeah, thanks. And before I jump into it, I just want to thank y'all, DST, and your social action team. I think Rhonda described it brilliantly. It's about our collective power and engagement. So I want to thank y'all and the work that you're doing here. But to put it simply, redistricting is the drawing or the redrawing of political boundaries or district lines. But it's a process that begins once every 10 years on the federal, state, and local level. And so congressional redistricting, excuse me, congressional redistricting is usually the first process to start because those maps have to be finalized before the midterm election in November. But these redrawn districts determine where local elected officials are elected from, where state state representatives, state senators, where they're elected from, as well as our Congress people, where they're elected from. And redistricting has traditionally been used as a method to further advance voter suppression, especially as it relates to racial gerrymandering. And racial gerrymandering is a practice that dilutes the voting power of minority groups like African Americans. And there are different types of racial gerrymandering. You have a kind of like what Jarvis just alluded to. You have a PAC district. A PAC district is a district that concentrates as many African Americans or any other minority group into one district, so they don't have political power or voting power in adjacent districts. You also have a crack district. A crack district is a district that spreads minority voters or African American voters across multiple districts to prevent them from having political power in adjacent political districts. And you also have stag districts. A stag district is a district that places poor African American voters in the same district with affluent, educated white voters. And those African American voters often have the majority, a small majority in those districts. But because affluent, educated voters tend to vote at a higher rate, those white voters are able to retain political power. An example of a stacked district would be a couple of years ago, Mississippi State Senate District 22, which the court forced the state to redraw a couple of years ago. Sorry about this, y'all. This weather has my sinus messing up. But the court forced the state to redraw Senate District 22 a couple of years ago. And this was a stacked district that ran all the way from the Mississippi Delta in Bolivar County all the way down to more affluent areas in Madison County. And so for years, this is a state Senate district that had a white state senator. And when the court forced the state to redraw this district, it's a district that finally now has Black political representation.
So how is the NAACP of Mississippi addressing these issues, especially as it relates to voter suppression?
Yeah, right now we've really been focused on congressional redistricting. We proposed a plan back in November to the state legislature, a congressional plan. And our plan closely resembles the current congressional map. And we made some minor changes, such as adding all of Hinds County to Congressional District 2. We also added more of Madison County to Congressional District 2. So we proposed that plan back in November to the state legislature. But of course, they did not adopt our plan, our map. Instead, they adopted their own state proposal. They're calling it Magnolia 1. And so when we saw their plan, we were immediately concerned about their plan, especially as it relates to Congressional District 2, because it greatly expands Congressional District 2. It adds 4 counties in Southwest Mississippi to Congressional District 2, Adams, Amite, Franklin, and Wilkinson counties. And so Congressional District 2 is a very large congressional district. It covers about 40% of the land area in the state. And so you just made an already large congressional district even larger. And so their rationale for adding these 4 new counties to Congressional District 2 was the fact that Congressional District 2 lost population, lost 65,000 people, so they had to make up for that population loss somehow. Right? But our plan, the plan that we proposed, made up for that population loss by adding all of Hinds County and more of Madison County to Congressional District 2. And from a common sense standpoint, you would think that since most of Hinds County is already in Congressional District 2, the most practical thing to do would be to add the rest of that county to that congressional district and add more of Madison County, which is an adjacent county, to that congressional district. And so our plan is a lot more compact. Our plan also contains fewer split precincts and fewer split counties than the current congressional plan, as well as the plan that the state has proposed. And in January, the state Republican Party, they filed a motion through the United States District Court for the Southern District that has basically asked the court to vacate their injunction or their jurisdiction on congressional redistricting, because Mississippi's congressional map from previous redistricting cycles, the 2011 map, the 2001 map, both of those are maps that were drawn by the federal court because Mississippi had an unconstitutionally malapportioned map, and they couldn't put together a map, and they couldn't get a map pre-cleared. So the court stepped in and drew the plan in 2011 and 2001. And so they're asking the court to vacate their injunction so they can move forward and implement their own plan. And so we filed a response to that, asking the court not to vacate their injunction, to determine the constitutionality of the state's plan. Is the state's plan in compliance with the Voting Rights Act? Is the state's plan in compliance with criteria that's been laid out by the court in previous redistricting litigation, like compactness, like keeping high population growth areas in separate districts, like not having split counties or split precincts? Is the state's plan in compliance with that criteria? And so we're asking the court to determine the constitutionality of that plan, and in the process, implement the NAACP plan as the interim plan. And so there was a status conference in February. And so both parties were able to present their motions, and the court asked both parties to present, to file a brief. And so we just did that a few weeks ago. And so this is still an ongoing process with the court. And so I know some folks are probably asking, well, how does an expanded Congressional District 2, how does that have an impact on voter suppression or Black voters' ability to vote in elections? And I'll simply put it this way. Let's say, for instance, that Congressional District 2, which is represented by Congressman Thompson, is a vacated seat, and a new candidate, a new Black candidate runs for that seat. Well, this is a greatly expanded district that has different divergent communities of interest. And so Mississippi doesn't have a large Black donor base. And so it'll be hard for that new Black candidate to raise funds. You have all of these different media markets in that district, in the northwest corner of the district, the Tunica, the Memphis media market, down to the Jackson media market, down to the Baton Rouge media market in Southwest Mississippi. And so it'll be extremely difficult for a new Black candidate to raise funds and effectively campaign in a district so large with so many different divergent communities of interest. And so the question becomes, under those circumstances, would Black voters in that district truly have the ability to elect a candidate of their choice?
So how would someone be able to prove that, though? So this is like, clearly, we can look at the numbers and we know historically how things have operated, but could their argument be, well, you don't know that. You don't know that a Black person couldn't win. Well, what would be that rebuttal to that?
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of things you could look at in a district that's being expanded. You can look at voting performance in those new added counties, right? Are these counties, do they historically underperform at the ballot box? Has it historically been hard for Black political candidates to be elected? Do these 4 counties have a history of voter suppression? Those are the type of issues that we can look into, right? The historical context around voter suppression and voting laws in those counties, and how the electorate typically behaves in those counties. So I think those are factors that we could look into to make that argument. And I also think when we look at this new congressional plan, right, there's an argument to be made that race was the predominant factor in how this congressional district was drawn. By not adding all of Hinds County and more of Madison County, which are majority white areas, was race a factor in how they drew that congressional district, right? Is it because white voters in that portion of the county, in Hinds County and in Madison County, don't want Black representation, want to be represented by a Black Congressman Thompson?
Right.
So those are arguments that can be made, and it would be unconstitutional if race was used as a factor in how they drew this congressional district.
Right. Great points.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch over to Arika now, because one of the things I love about Mississippi Votes is that they get the young folk, and I'm saying younger than me. Y'all get these young folk really engaged in voting and the civic engagement process altogether. So I just want to, first of all, just tell me about Mississippi Votes. Let everybody know who you are and what you all do.
Sure. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be among the women of Delta Sigma Theta, because I can see your heart and your love for our people in the way you uphold our tradition in the freedom struggle. So thank you for all you do. Always in good company with LaTosha, Matt, and Jarvis. So hey, y'all. But for folks who don't know, Mississippi Votes was birthed out of necessity. In 2016, we began this journey of researching voting trends in our state and understanding the gaps in voter engagement throughout the country and the state. And what we found were that there were just over 300 and something thousand eligible unregistered voters across the state. And many of them were Black folks, many of them were young people, and many of them living on the margins of what it means to be marginalized in this state. And so we founded Mississippi Votes to answer this question about, A, what does it mean to start from a Black girl's fears and create a world that's safe for her through policy? And B, what might it mean to utilize the imagination of young people, give them the tools and resources to build a democracy that works for everybody? And so we've been dreaming of those plans since inception. We've registered somewhat over 30,000 new voters in 2018 when we launched our Up to Us campaign, which is our GOTV, our Get Out the Vote effort. There was an uptick in not just voter registration among 18 to 42-year-olds, but there was a dramatic uptick in civic participation. And so that's our work. Freedom Summer is at the core of who we are and what we do. And yeah.
So how has Mississippi Votes been engaged with our lawmakers in Mississippi in advocating for voting rights?
Sure. So our policy and research program is designed to advocate for the advancement of public policies that improve and broaden the landscape of Mississippi. And so we have a lot of different goals that we try to achieve every legislative session. And that means putting forth a legislative agenda that reflects a more modernized approach to voting, a friendlier approach to voting, widening the accessibility to like who gets to do what at the ballot box, right? And so Mississippi's 11% of Mississippi's population is disenfranchised. Mississippi has 23 disenfranchising crimes. Depending on who you ask, it's 22, but I say 23 because it includes voter fraud, whatever that is. Mississippi only allows, there are two ways that somebody can get their suffrage back. They can either become a bill through the legislature or they can get pardoned by the governor. Both sometimes feel like an act of Congress, but each year, an act of God really, but each year we submit somewhat over 50 something applications, and every year some people go through the whole legislative process and die in one chamber or the other, or die on the governor's desk. And then another thing that we advocate for is obviously voter modernization, and Jarvis alluded to some of this with some of the packages that he put together as a legislator, early no excuse absentee voting, electronic absentee voting, and automatic voter registration, all of which would put Mississippi in the 21st century when it comes to accessibility and modernizing our processes, all of which have somehow failed in the state legislature, which, to Matthew's point around having to build this pipeline of leadership and young folks who are invested and embedded in Mississippi, who want to run for office and who can speak to the needs of the people in their area. And then the last part being protecting democracy. So right now, for sure, organizationally, we are, we believe in the people-centered process, which would inevitably mean the ballot initiative process that the Mississippi Supreme Court struck down in early 2021. But there's a bill, House Concurrent Resolution 39, that seeks to reinstate the ballot initiative process. And our problem organizationally is not that there's a bill, but there's a bill that has holes in it. So House Concurrent Resolution 39 doesn't reinstate the citizens initiative process that we once had, where you collect signatures. If it's enough, it gets on the ballot. This process permits vast government overreach and legislative control. It makes it really hard for the average Mississippian to have access to. And so to your question, all of that is Mississippi Vote's core agenda in creating and building relationships with legislators so that we can defend democracy and advocate for holistic and accessible means to the voting booth.
Well, we really do appreciate all of this work that you are doing, all of you actually. And so far we've talked specifically about Mississippi issues, but I want to bring in LaTosha Brown in this conversation with the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, because the work that you're doing affects us all, everyone in the United States, basically. So first, can you tell us about Black Voters Matter and what prompted creating this organization?
Absolutely. First, let me say Mississippi matters. I am a native of Alabama, but my summers I was in Mississippi. I usually tell people Macomb, but it was actually Summit, Mississippi, because it's a small community and most people don't know Summit. Arika was like, I do. So if you know any Browns in Mississippi, from Summit, Mississippi, Macomb, that's my people. And so I think it's really important kind of in this moment, I'll share that Black Voters Matter is a power building organization. We were created in 2016 with three things in mind. That one, that we would actually create a vehicle to mobilize Black folks for the purpose of building independent political power for Black people, right? That wasn't wasn't based on a political party or political candidates, but it was actually based on us getting power. The second thing is that we would resource that. Those of us who have been organizers in the South know that we've been grossly underinvested, and that what we would do is we would put some money on the ground. And so as a result, last year alone, we were able to invest over $10 million directly to Black grassroots groups in over 15 states around the nation, including the Divine Nine. And let me just say, the Red Army was one of our core partners throughout many, 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 many states. When we get to a community, we're like, where the Deltas at? And then the third thing is we wanted to make sure that we lifted up messaging, and that we really believe that we're in a narrative war. That at the end of the day, who tells the story shapes the narrative of how people understand and move forward. And so for us, what we wanted to do is to make sure that we were lifting up not just the challenges that are happening to us, but that we wanted to also be able to amplify our victories and let people understand that part of these attacks are not coming because we're losing, y'all. The good news is the attacks are coming because we're actually moving forward. And so we wanted to make sure that people are really understanding, and that as we're putting this narrative out, what's really important to me as I think about Mississippi, I want people to really recognize in this moment that what we are doing, sisters, we are ushering in a new era, that this is a new era that we're going into. And so we can't, I talk about this all the time, but one of the greatest sins of racism and oppression is to make you forget who you are and make you to forget the progress that you've made, to seem to make you think that you've not made any advancement. Listen, my folks grew up in Mississippi. My people were in Mississippi. My father was born and raised in Mississippi. That ain't the same Mississippi that was the Mississippi that he grew up in, right? I'm raising that because all of that change happened, not because of the goodness and the benevolence of the white folk in Mississippi. It was from the goodness and the vision of those who believe, both white and Black, and folks who had the courage to stand, on what was righteous. And so I also, in the midst of us going through this voter suppression right now, I don't want us to forget the good news. I don't want us to forget that in such a time as this, we are alive because we have a mission. Our mission is literally to push the ball forward. Our mission is to literally, how can we transform where the place of the pain happened, where our people were bought as enslaved Africans in the Deep South, that this is the very place that I think our liberation is going to happen. And so in that space, I think it's important for us to recognize that as we're talking about doing this work around voting, and as Black Voters Matter has been doing this work about voting, it hasn't just been about voting. For us, it's about how do we build an ecosystem of Black grassroots groups throughout the nation that can create a framework so that we can respond to policy issues, that we can respond not just to elections, we can respond in a context of power. Love and power are our anchors. And so our work has been around moving the message. Our work has been around moving the money, and we've done that throughout the nation in 12 states.
That is amazing. And one of the things that people may realize, may not realize, or maybe they do. The Black Voters Matter bus, when it comes through, we know that there's some work that's really going down. You know what I mean?
There's some work going down. When you see what we call it, we affectionately call it the blackest bus in America.
Okay.
The Black Voters Matter, which is the blackest bus in America. Wherever we're showing up, there's work already happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to shout out our state coordinator, Carol Blackman, who is right there in Mississippi, who has been leading our work in Mississippi and working with Hbcus. And there's so much richness in Mississippi. I wish I could tell y'all, right? I know you know it and you feel it, but sometimes because we see the oppression, we get our eyes off the prize. When fundamentally there's so much, you got 38, almost 40% of the population of Black folk. We can do a lot with them numbers right there. And so while we've got to fight these different fights, I do think that there's kind of three ways that we need to look at it. Yes, there's a structural fight that we have to deal with. We have to deal with the structural racism that is embedded in the voting systems, that is embedded in the actual governance in the state of Mississippi. But the second part of that is also around our strategic fight. We have to be strategic around this coalition building that we talked about, how we work together, how we leverage our power, how we utilize those spaces that we're in. But the third one I also want to raise, and we don't think about it as I think as much as we should in the political space, but it is a spiritual fight. We have to really recognize that our groundedness, that when we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, when we talk about Medgar Evers, that Mississippi led the way. And I expect that Mississippi will continue to lead the way, that literally some of the most powerful anchors in the civil rights and the voting rights movement and thinkers in this world, in this nation, came out of Mississippi. And so we have to really recognize that is our inheritance. That is part of our legacy. And how do we move forward? So it's going to require us to really go to higher ground. We can't just get caught up in this transaction around election. We have to be unapologetic about how we're going to organize to get power for our people, right? And be able to transform that state so that we can actually have the state and the nation that we desire and we deserve. And so we've been having that approach all around the country. I often say, some of the best organizing I've ever seen in my life. Some of my training, because I've worked in Mississippi far before Black Voters Matter, right, has been in Mississippi because it's relational organizing. Like we know the folk, we connect with the folk in the Delta. It'd be a telephone call. I remember one of my first trips there, I was in Sunflower County, and one phone call connected me to 20 counties automatically. Automatic. We use relationships.
You right about that, girl. You done preached a word tonight. So I want to ask you also about the 1 Million for Voting Rights campaign that the Black Voters Matter is doing. Tell us about that.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. We in that same spirit, of the civil rights movement, in the same spirit of how do we kind of move forward and keeping our eyes on the prize, what we have done is launched a campaign called 1 Million for Voting Rights, and what we wanted to do is to be able to lift up and connect with folks. Everybody's not going to be on the activists in the front line. Everybody going to get arrested with us. We've done everything from file lawsuits to get arrested, to organize, to have a collard green caucus. We're using all of those things within our community and the culture, our cultural capital, to be able to connect to our folks, to educate our folks, and to get outside of this space of just a transaction about an election. This is about power and transformation for us. And so in that, we decided to launch this campaign in light of the voter suppression that was happening, that we didn't have to look at this as an isolated incident, that we didn't have any power, but that what we would do is what Hbcus said earlier. You know, I think Brother Matt, I think you said it as well, is how do we, and Rhonda did as well, how do we consolidate our power in a way that we're actually directed, that we're directing our power and our focus so that we can actually create the kind of policy, policies that we want. We have the right to make a decision on who governs us and how they're governed. And if people ultimately want to be a part of it, we're asking that folks to please come join the campaign with whatever you're doing, whether you're organizing, whether you're seeking to put information out. We're attempting to connect to over 1 million people between now and in August, which would be the anniversary of the signing of the Voting Rights Act. They can go to our website and learn more information. And you can also text to Black and voting to 25225. If you text voting 25225, you'll be able to have updates and be a part of the campaign. And if you don't remember the numbers I gave you, if you look down at your keypad, it spells Black. So if you text voting to Black, we'll get your information, be able to stay connected to you.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So look, we have 45 minutes in, and I want to bring on our amazing president of the Jackson, Mississippi Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, our sorority, Gwen Handy. She wants to share some words. Is Gwen available to join us briefly? Okay, might not be time for her yet. So while we wait for Gwen, I wanted to bring up some things that, you know, people have been learning about the voter suppression laws that were passed, like in Texas and in Georgia. Specifically, like things like, you know, not being able to pass food out when you're standing in line, because the voting line, we know in our precincts, our voting lines are going to be extremely long. And in Georgia now, you can't pass food out. So some of the things like that, and this is for anyone who would like to answer this, what can we learn in Mississippi, and how can we be prepared for anything that might possibly come down the pike in our laws? Anybody want to take that?
I'll just jump in and say something real quick. You know, I think part of what we have to do is we have to be resilient, we have to be resistant, and we have to really be focused and recommit ourselves to this process. We have to recognize that we're going to have to fight on multiple levels. Just as Rhonda talked about earlier, it is going to require some of us filing lawsuits, which we participate in several lawsuits. We're going to have to organize. We're going to have to organize ourselves, that our community know about what is happening and they feel empowered and engaged in it. And then the third thing is we're going to have to demand federal legislation. That at the end of the day, no matter how much we organize, we can't out-organize all that is happening right now. So we're going to have to really be able to use our power to actually put pressure. Right now, currently, we should be calling out our state senators. Right now, currently, we should be organizing with other groups as a coalition. There should be some consequences. That one of the things that we offered was a corporate accountability campaign. I'll just say this real quick. Sometimes, you know, let me tell you, racists may not care about protests. Racists may not care about, you know, having bad press. But let me tell you what they care about. They care about that money. And so ultimately what we had to do is we wound up organizing corporate accountability campaigns, and we actually targeted those who had been sponsors of these voter suppression bills. Many times, which you look, they own the insurance companies, they own businesses, and in South Georgia, in some of those places, that they were attorneys, or they might have been the city or the county attorney. Our folks organized and got them fired. They lost those contracts. So that at the end of the day, what we have to do is we have to be very innovative around how we address the issue, that there's a larger structure issue, that we need the federal legislation, but we also got to do an accountability campaign, that those that are on the front of leading this, we have to find those pressure points. And what we have found as a very effective pressure point is to actually go after those companies that are supporting those folks who are leading and sponsoring these voter suppression bills, and actually go after their dollars ourselves.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is build on the coalition building piece, right? So like that is super powerful, especially when you're talking about a state like Mississippi, and how we kind of lack a political infrastructure, organizing infrastructure, and like Matt said earlier, a pipeline where we're regenerating leaders to not just run for office, but folks who are organizing and folks who are researching these different policies and laws. Because in Mississippi, we're responding to so many things at one time, and our organizations are small, we mighty, but super small, and there's not enough capacity of us, training and researching and getting in the forefront of some of these policy fights. A lot of our fights are organized, and a lot of our fights, after one is over, we have to respond to the very real material conditions of people's lives. So we can be responding to early voter registration or early no absentee voting like we were in 2020, but in the middle of all of that, there's an ice storm. So how do we build lasting, sustainable models where our people have what they need, and we're also engaging in the fight actively? So we have to have more fighters.
That's a very good point, because when you said that we're because we're small yet mighty, we are reacting to too many things, and so we can get we don't have the capacity yet to get to I guess pre-plan and fight in advance as opposed to reacting to a lot of things. That's a good point, Erika. So I see that we have Gwen has joined us. So the president of our chapter is Gwen Handy. So before we close this evening, we want her to share some words with us.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And first, let me say thank you so much for those who participated tonight, Mr. Deutsch, Mr. Matthew, Miss Bennett Scott, and the Reverend LaTosha Brown, because that's how she came with us today. And of course, Sarah Bridgen. Bridgen, I've known her for many years. I've known her for many of years, serving on the Social Action Commission with Delta Sigma Theta. But I've never heard LaTosha Brown speak, and she brought the word tonight. I can say that. And of course, being from Summit, I'm from Bude, which is right next door. Yes, which is right next door to Summit. So I better look into that to see if we are related in some form or fashion. But I do want to thank each one of you for attending tonight and sharing the information that you have shared with the community, for also sharing the strategies on how we can increase the community involvement on voter suppression and voters' rights. I'm not going to say too much because the sermon has already been laid out and presented. I just want to make sure that everyone know how much we enjoy the information that was shared tonight. And of course, I hope we be able to invite you again to any matter dealing with Black voters suppression or anything that deals with our community. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And Aaron, of course, always the spirited host that you are. Thank you so much for being the lead on this, along with our Social Action Chair, Sarah Kia Jones. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Aaron, so you can go ahead and close us out. Thank you so much again, everyone, for participating.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Sarah Kia Jones is the Social Action Chair. And there are co-chairs, and I'm now that everybody's name, Letitia Latiker, and I'm escaping. Who's the other co-chair, Gwen?
Sharita
Young.
Young. Sharita
Young. Yes. So they are the co-chairs of the Social Action Committee. I'm a committee member. They put a lot of work into planning this event and getting all of the panelists on here. I just got on to facilitate. So I'm just here doing my job. But I just want to thank you all so much. We've learned so much this evening. And one of the things that I want to impress upon everyone is to do like everyone is saying. All of our organizations need to work collectively on the regular basis, continually working with Black Voters Matter, NAACP, Mississippi Votes, and ACLU of Mississippi, especially when it comes to advocacy and holding lawmakers accountable. And that's what I really want us to get into, a point where we can start holding lawmakers accountable for the ridiculous laws that, hinder our access to voting, or in anything, actually, for that matter. Anything that's hindering our community, we need to be advocating for them all together. And so I'm just so thankful that everyone was able to join this evening. Everyone shared some amazing information with us. And again, Reverend Brown over here, she did a great way of closing us with all of the information and inspiring us to not only focus on the little things that's holding us back, but we need to share the stories. And that's another thing that I would love for our organizations to do together, and this is something we might need to talk offline, but just think about ways that we can either do like a video or something that highlights the work that we are all doing together, that shows that we are doing the work, and we do have the capacity at some point to get more Mississippians involved and engaged, and calling on lawmakers and holding them accountable. We need to do something like that together. I think that'll be amazing.
That's your next project, Erin. That's your next project.
Can I offer a resource real quick?
Yes, most definitely.
There's 2 resources I want to offer. So one, we're on the leadership. I'm so proud of Rika. I don't know what to do, but I'm gonna come back to that and the great work they've been doing. They've been we've worked with them as a partner, and we are also supporting we're looking for other grantee groups. So if there are groups that are doing power building work, particularly in smaller organizations that are doing throughout, even as the women are doing power building work, please consider us. Please reach out to us if there's resources that are needed. There's another resource I want to lift up, which is actually I'm founder of an organization called the Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. And so what we also do is support Black girls and women. And so currently right now we have a Black Girl Joy Challenge, and we're actually giving the Black girls that come up with a project to create and generate joy for themselves and 10 other girls, 10 other people, we're actually providing a $500 scholarship to them, a $500 individual grant for them. And so go to Southern Black Girls. We are open right now and receiving those ideas so that we can get a couple of dollars in these sisters' pockets that have the audacity to dream.
I love it. I love it. That is amazing. And that's how you can, we have such young talent that we just need to, we just need to support them and to get them to where they need to be. Yeah, I love that with the $500 scholarship. Thank you. We would definitely have, look, Kia has already put in the chat that she will be contacting you.
So go to Southern Black Girls, but I can send it and it'll be on my page, but I'll send it to you all.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you so much. Well, we are at the end of our forum. I hope that everyone that participated learned something, and I hope that everyone was inspired to do some work when it comes into social action, civic engagement in our communities. I just hope that everyone enjoyed it, and we'll see you next go round. Oh, before I go, I wanted to mention again for those who would love to make a contribution to your favorite HBCU in Mississippi. Our chapter has been doing a fundraiser for the next, Rico already put in there, JSU. So we have, look at scrolling at the bottom of your screen, you'll see where you can text to donate to Mississippi HBCU. And this is a fundraiser. We want all of our schools to thrive. And so we need alumni, friends, and anybody. If you admire any of these schools or anything, just make a small donation. It does not matter how small or how big you want to donate. Go ahead. Arika, you have an announcement you want to make?
Yeah, just real quick. So every year, Mississippi Votes has a lot of youth programs. One of them is the Democracy and Action Fellowship Program. We're on all 17 colleges and university campuses. That application is live on our website, msvotes.org. We're looking for students at all colleges and universities, especially a priority to the HBCU. So I just wanted to name that. It's a paid fellowship program. I think $800 a semester. So you don't want to miss out on that. Holla at us.
Right. Every amount counts. So thank you all. Thank you again. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you so much. You all be blessed.